Joining me now to talk more about this is the president's acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, welcome back to Fox News Sunday. Thanks for taking the time. I know you got back to South Carolina to see your family for the first time since New Year's.
John, good morning. Thanks very much for having me, as always.
So did the president here cave to Democrats? I think a lot of Republicans think that he capitulated here because he really came away from 35 days of a government shutdown with nothing more than he could have had at least 2 weeks ago when Senator Graham proposed the same thing, and maybe even back to before this whole thing started.
No, I think what you've seen here is the president seeing an opportunity. Why he did what he did was because many Democrats had come to us, some of them privately, many of them spoke out publicly, that they're actually starting to agree with him on the necessity for a barrier on the southern border. And they had come to us and said, look, we agree with you. You're winning the battle on the importance of a barrier on the southern border, but we simply cannot work with you while the government is open. That's a marked difference, while the government was closed. Yeah. That's a marked difference from where the Democrat leadership was, where they said they wouldn't talk to us about border security ever. Nancy Pelosi famously said that even if we opened the government, she wouldn't give us a single dollar for the wall. So I think the president saw a chance here to try and take the Democrats at their word. Some of the rank and file, also some of the leadership. Dick Durbin said some decent things about a border barrier. Jim Clyburn, my former colleague from South Carolina, said that if the experts thought we really needed a barrier, he could vote for it. So this gave a chance to the Democrats to prove whether or not they really do believe in border security and are willing to go against Nancy Pelosi, or whether or not they are so beholden to their leadership that they're never going to vote for a barrier on the southern border.
Now, the president is under no illusions, Mick, that this is going to be a difficult task ahead. He tweeted out yesterday, 21 days goes very quickly. Negotiations with Democrats will start immediately. Will not be easy to make a deal. Both parties very dug in. Nancy Pelosi is on record several times, and you pointed out, as saying no money for a wall. How do you get Democrats to move her off of that position? I mean, she seems to have the solidarity of the Democratic Party behind her.
I laugh every time she says there's no money for the wall. She actually just voted for almost $250 million for a barrier on the southern border with this deal that just got approved last week. But I think what we simply do is go to the Democrats and say, look, are you telling the people the truth? When you look at your constituents back home and say you agree with the president that we have to do something about security at the southern border, are you telling them the truth, or are you just doing something that's politically expedient? This is a chance for them to let their actions speak louder than words. Keep in mind, the last time the Democrats sort of followed Nancy Pelosi blindly down a path on policy, we ended up with Obamacare and bailouts and cap and trade, and they lost control of the House. So the question is Nancy really leading the Democrat Party, or is she just being led by the hard left wing of her party, and will the rest of the Democrats follow her? So no, this is just the next step in the negotiation. We thought it was the exact right thing for the president to do at the time, and I think ultimately he'll be judged by the end of by what happens at the end of this process, not by what happened this week.
There is some money in the continuing resolution for border security, but that's to upgrade existing fencing. That's not for construction of new mileage of border wall, which is what you want, if we could stipulate that. The request...
Absolutely correct, but let me jump in there very quickly. But when you go from a 2-foot high barrier to a 30-foot high wall,
it makes a difference.
That counts. That counts as new security.
All right, so the president was asking for $5.7 billion. The vice president took to Congress day after Christmas an offer of, I think it was $2.4 billion. Are you stuck on the 5.7, or will you take less than that?
I think the president wants his $5.7 billion. Keep in mind, why is that number? It's not a number that's made up. It's what the experts have told him. He's listened to DHS. I've been in on the meetings. He's listened to CBP. He's listened to ICE. We have identified the top 17 highest priorities in terms of where we can put up barrier to discourage people from crossing the border illegally. It's about 243 miles. That's what's driving this discussion. It's not a made-up magical number of $5.7 billion. It's the wall where we need it the most and where we need it the quickest. That's what's driving this. So this is not something where the president's married to a number. He's married to border security, which is the right thing for the president of the United States to do.
It's not lost on me that you shrewdly ducked my question. Will he take less than 5.7 in a negotiation?
Oh, I wasn't ducking your question. I just wasn't negotiating with you on TV. You know I'd never do that.
But is he prepared to take less than the 5.7? I mean, you were willing to take 2.6 going into Christmas. There was the offer of 2.4. I mean, clearly he's not hard and fast on that number.
Again, if I don't answer your question, I don't mean to dodge. But let's look at it this way. The president has already gone to the Democrats and say, look, it's not a 2,000-mile sea to shining sea wall. It's not a giant 30-foot concrete barrier that so many Democrats seem to have any difficulty with. He even put DACA and TPS on the table at some point during this process, and they refused to even engage. So I think the better question is, what are the Democrats willing to do? The president, from the very beginning here, actually has been the one willing to negotiate. He was the one staying in Washington, D.C. when Nancy went to Hawaii. He's the one who stayed in D.C. when Democrats all went down to Puerto Rico. He was in D.C. when she tried to leave to go to Europe and the Middle East last week. He wants to negotiate on the deal. The Democrat leadership simply refused to take him up on that.
It is fortuitous that we have West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin coming up, Mick, because we will be able to ask that question about what Democrats plan to do. Would you recommend another shutdown to the president if there's no deal by February the 15th?
Look, we look at it going backwards. What do we need to protect the country? And we need border security, and that includes a barrier. Keep in mind, lost in all of this are the requests that we've made for things like more technology, improvement at our ports of entry, all of the things that go into.
But would you recommend he shut down the government again?
No one wants a government shutdown, John. It's not a desired end. But when a president vetoes a bill that's put in front of him on a spending package, sometimes that has the effect of shutting the government down. We don't go into this trying to shut the government down.
He also threatened an emergency declaration and use money that's already appropriated to build the wall. OMB, which you used to head and still officially do, has been looking around for pots of money. How much money did you find to build a wall?
More than $5.7 billion. The president told us several months ago to try and find money in every nook and cranny. He told every member of the cabinet to do the exact same. OMB's been working on this for several months now, and there's a lot more than $5.7 billion. It's still better, John, to get it through legislation. That's the right way to do it. But at the end of the day, the president is going to secure the border one way or another.
So when the president comes to you and says, Mick, should I declare an emergency if you don't get money for a wall and you don't want to shut down the government, would you recommend he do that? Because it would certainly almost immediately be enjoined by the courts, and most likely a court in the jurisdiction of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that could be playing his last card.
We're just as aware of all of those contingencies as you just laid out as everybody else is, so if there's ways we can do it to try and mitigate those risks, we certainly will. There are some pots of money that are easier to get to than to others. So again, this is not something we're shooting on from the hip. We've been working on this for months. We have been hoping for months to do it through legislation with Democrats, because that's the right way for the government to function. But at the end of the day, the president's commitment is to defend the nation, and he'll do it either with or without Congress.
For the $5.7 billion, you want to build about 170 miles of border wall through Texas. One thing that I find curious is that nobody's talking about here is that in most places along the Rio Grande, you can't build fence in the floodplain of the Rio Grande. So you have to build it inland, anywhere from a couple of hundred yards to, in some places, a mile, which might help you in interdicting drugs and human trafficking and people who don't want to get caught. But for all of those migrants, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, the Northern Triangle countries, they can still, even with a border barrier, get feet on U.S. soil. And their goal is to be apprehended by the Border Patrol and get into the system. So how would building a barrier in Texas affect this problem of illegal immigration that the president talks about each and every day?
That goes back to the larger discussion about border security. Yes, there's a barrier. Yes, there's technology. And the part that sometimes gets forgotten about is something the president's talked about many, many times, which is to change our laws. Because you're absolutely right. If the barrier is back 1 foot from the border, and someone can get 1 foot on our soil, depending on what country they're from, they can claim asylum and stay here almost indefinitely. It's why some of the other things we've done, the deal we've negotiated with Mexico to allow folks who are claiming asylum here to have to go back to Mexico to wait while their asylum is being adjudicated. That's been a major improvement that I don't think has gotten nearly the attention that it deserves. But it does raise, your point does raise the larger picture that we need to change the laws. That's part and parcel of this comprehensive border security concept. It's not just about a barrier. It's not just about technology. It's about changing the laws that right now act as this giant pull. We encourage people to come here from other countries to enter the country illegally because of the way our laws are structured, and those need to be fixed as well as part of a larger national security package.
We should also point out, though, that this Remain in Mexico policy right now only applies to people who are entering from a port of entry, not people who cross the border illegally. I got to ask you quickly before we go, because time is running short. Venezuela, is the U.S. ruling out military action if Maduro refuses to cede leadership?
I don't think any president of any party who's doing his or her job would be doing the job properly if they took anything off the table. So I think the President of the United States is looking at this extraordinarily closely. I can tell you, without giving away anything I shouldn't, that we're in constant communication with the Secretary of State, constant communication with the other parts of the federal government to find out what's going on the ground down there, making sure that our people and our property is safe down there. and also to make sure that we can do everything we can to encourage the Maduro government, which we consider to be illegitimate, to leave. And to back the new National Assembly leadership that declared this week. So it's a very serious situation. The president takes it very seriously, and I think it's fair to say that no options are off the table.
We'll keep watching that. Mick, thanks for taking time away from your family this weekend to be with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean.